Hey everyone, it's Kong again with another episode of Should You Summon. As always, I'm going to be presenting high-level overviews to help you decide whether this banner is worth your hard-earned vouchers and crystals. And hey, finally, some actual Langrisser characters! This month's banner features Tiana and Zion from Langrisser Millennium WS, The Last Century. And yes, that's his correct name. He's never appeared in an official English version of a game before, so the name you might have seen before his release here was an approximation based on sounding out the Japanese translation of the word Zion. Kind of like when you run something through Google Translate multiple times. This game was released on Bandai's handheld WonderSwan console in the year 2000. That's what the WS in the title stands for. This is a prequel set 100 years before the events of Langrisser Millennium, not Langrisser Millennium itself, so there is still another Langrisser game out there for Zilong to tap into. This banner runs from October 17th to November 13th. As usual, any SSR you pull has a 40% chance to be either featured unit, with the remaining 20% chance reserved for any random off-banner unit in the regular summoning pool. First up, we have Tiana. Tiana is an interesting mix of a bruiser and an assassin. She puts her body in harm's way with a kind of pseudo-guard skill, but also uses a designated ally as a springboard for sneaky attacks. Her talent boosts her attack and defense, and she doesn't suffer melee damage penalties. After acting, she can choose an ally to protect, increasing her stats and the designated ally's stats by up to 15%, and giving her a revive. Now here's the fun part. If Tiana is within 3 spaces, and her designated ally initiates a normal attack, old Tiana will jump into the fray and execute the attack instead. She also guards attacks within 3 spaces. As we would expect, this combos with a couple other parts of her kit. Her 1-cost skill is a passive that gives her +2 mobility when she's not within 3 spaces of her designated ally. When used actively, it heals her a bit and sets her up for an act again. The next time she attacks in place of her designated ally, she can act again. Sets up some sneaky combos. Her 3-cost skill can also take advantage of her protect effect. Whenever she deals damage, the enemy gets a debuff that allows Tiana to guard ignore on them for 2 turns. When used actively, it's a beefy 2-range, 1.8 times damage single target attack. If your designated ally is within 3 spaces, the cooldown of this skill is refreshed by 5. If they're not, Tiana can teleport back to them. Finally, her 2-cost skill lets her hit the closest enemy in a straight line with a 0.3 times AoE pop. She then gains a 20% damage dealt buff and first strike for 2 rounds. She's a member of Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, Grenier, and Bright Summoner, Yles Legends, buffed by Landius, Sigma, and the upcoming Enya, and Meteor Strike, buffed by Zerida and Epsilon. For bonds, she unlocks the defensive bond for her bannermate Zion, and she needs her bannermate for her own defensive bond as well. Yep, one of those banners. For content, in PvE, she's on faction for Phoenix and Scylla in the Eternal Temple, and Jormungandr, Hugin and Munin, and Nidhogg in Ancient Beckoning. Because of her built-in Act Again, she's obviously enticing for Ancient Beckoning, and spends some time as a top-scoring Jormungandr option before Enya comes out to mix things up. On the PvP side, she becomes a meta Apex Arena threat who appeared in many boxes in China through Season 19. For her build, she is most commonly seen in her Assassin class, usually with Lurker's Sting, Owl Hat, and Butterfly, and your choice of body armor. Breeze, obviously. Okay, let's move on to Zion. Zion is the main protagonist of Millennium WS. He's just a bright-eyed little fella. He's a straightforward single-target striker whose gimmick revolves around killing or not killing his targets. After acting, if he engaged in combat and didn't get a kill, he picks up a buff that grants his next attack up to +20% damage and first strike. When he attacks and does get a kill, he can instead pardon the victim of his wanton violence, making it unable to move, guard, act, or use skills for 2 turns. Pardoning an enemy fully heals Zion as well. How generous and magnanimous. Or is it? His 1-cost skill's passive effect reveals his true intentions. If a pardoned enemy is within 3 spaces when Zion takes fatal damage, the pardoned enemy dies instead of Zion, and Zion gets some healing. When used actively, he heals a bit, activates his talent buff, the one that increases his damage and gives him first strike, and then he can move 3 more spaces and act again. His unique 2-cost skill is a 2-range, 1.4 times damage single target attack that strips 3 buffs before combat, lets him run 3 spaces after combat, and gets a 1-turn cooldown refresh if it kills. His 3-cost skill passively grants a protagonist faction buff after the first action and every time he uses this skill. The special faction buff effect is a plus 15% damage in combat, and a 1-turn cooldown refresh if a skill you use doesn't kill the target. When used actively, it's a typical 1.8 times damage single target skill that strips 5 buffs, we've seen those before, but it has a couple of bonus effects. If 2 or more of your allies are already dead, you get a juiced up version of his talent buff before combat, granting plus 30% damage and first strike. If you fail the kill, you can then act again. He's a member of Legion of Glory, buffed by Ledin, Elwyn, Grenier, and Bright Summoner, Yeles Legends, buffed by Landius, Sigma, and the upcoming Enya, and Protagonists, buffed by Matthew, Emperor Lavina, and of course, himself. Like Bright Summoner, he also has a normal 2-cost version of his faction buff, just with a 12% instead of 15% damage bonus. This is really nice for people who want to use him as their faction buffer before getting to level 70 and unlocking his 3C. For bonds, he unlocks the defensive bond for his bannermate Tiana, and he needs his bannermate for his own defensive bond as well. I just got deja vu. For content in PvE, he's on faction for Phoenix and Scylla in the Eternal Temple, and Hugin and Munin and Nidhogg in Ancient Beckoning. He does actually get some play in Hugin and Munin. Besides the ranked PvE content, he'll be very useful in faction-locked content like Forbidden Battleground, since he's the first protagonist buffer with an auto buff, meaning he can do stuff and buff without wasting a turn. Most people aren't really in a position where they need to summon specifically for Forbidden Battleground, but some people just like to play thematic faction-based teams. By contrast, in PvP, I haven't seen him get any use at all. His 1C passive is kind of like a revive, but with super stringent conditions. He also doesn't buff many meta characters in the current season, mainly Mac the Knife and Sword of Light and Shadow if she's even still kicking around. He'll get a lot more use in a fan-made format like Waifu Wars, assuming they haven't banned him. I'm sure Ozma or Raven will comment below this video to let us know, and I'll pin it. I'll pin that comment. For his build, since his main quote-unquote meta use is in Ancient Beckoning, that's the build I'll highlight, and it's a typical Ancient Beckoning build. Infantry class, Blazing Sun enchant with Stinger, Arcane Battle Garb, Fury of Tyr, and Slayer's Emblem. If you're going to enchant him for more normal content, then Breeze would be a better all-round enchant. Okay, let's move along to the notes for Noobs. Tiana is a strong meta Apex Arena unit who will appear in many boxes for the next couple seasons. She's also great in PvE because of her Act Again mechanics and versatile tactics. I do recommend summoning her. Zion is not as much of an obvious boon, but he does have some PvE use and he's a faction buffer. More importantly, he unlocks one of Tiana's bonds, so if you intend to summon her, you're going to want him as well. Zilong back to their old tricks again. Finally, just my usual note about upcoming banners. The remainder of the month features a couple of interesting banners, namely the usual slate of confusing and overwhelming wishlist banners for beginners, including the new mobile Acts 1 and 2 wishlist, as well as an open wishlist up to and including Tyrantel and Tabers. We're also getting a Raid Up banner featuring Amadeus and Isolde, and Destiny banners featuring Knight of Mystery, Archon of the Moon and Virash, Bozel, Liana and Luna, Gerald and Layla, Joa and Connie and Florentia, and Ashamar, Edankelmo, and Mary Hendel. Now bear in mind we may also see a surprise banner appear during this MU, something maybe displaced by the Shining Resonance rerun that happened. That collab rerun wasn't supposed to happen for another couple of months in China, but they decided to run it globally simultaneously, and that did displace some stuff from our normally scheduled MU last month. So that stuff may be just abandoned forever. It may fall in line with where Shining was supposed to happen in a few months. Or it may have a weird domino effect this month, we're not 100% sure. Assuming Zlong doesn't want to take us for a ride, next month's major update will be another crossover, this time a Capcom collab featuring 2 dual units like Gerald and Layla, Captain Commando and Babyhead, and Mac the Knife and Ginzu the Ninja, from Capcom's Captain Commando arcade beat-em-up. Weird? Yes!
I wanna take you for a ride.
Anyway, that's it for this episode. I'm gonna try to get 1 copy of each, so I can start slowly building Tiana for PvP. At least they're going into the general hero pool and will be coming back eventually, so missing out on one isn't the end of the world. How about you? Let us know your summoning plans in the comments or on This Old Neon's Discord. Thank you so much for watching, and extra special thanks of course to our Langrisser tier channel members Levitt, Jerome Meyer, Kate Soon, and Jorge Luis. I wish you all the best of luck, and I'll catch you in the next Should You Summon.